Yothin's father fell ill for an unknown reason and was taken to every hospital. However, no hospital was able to treat him. Eventually, the person next to his father's bed began to notice some unusual things that his father started doing every night while he was in the hospital. Before long, they discovered the truth about the cause of everything his father was experiencing. Before we dive into our scary story, we would like to ask everyone to like and subscribe to support us in continuing to bring you more terrifying tales in the future. This story is about Yothin, and it took place in the year 2021. During that time, Yothin's father suddenly started experiencing abdominal pain along with fever, feeling unusually weak. The abdominal pain was described by his father as extremely severe, as if something was inside his stomach, and he was groaning almost all the time. As more than 2 months passed, Yothin and his mother took his father to several hospitals in the district, city hospitals, and even the provincial hospital. But every hospital they visited only diagnosed him with gastritis, saying it wasn't anything serious and prescribed medication every time. However, his condition did not improve and only worsened. Despite moving from one hospital to another, there was no sign of recovery. By the 4th month, Yothin consulted with his mother about trying another hospital, specifically a regional hospital with more modern medical equipment that could provide a more detailed examination. Yothin's mother agreed to try another hospital. On the day they discussed going to that hospital, Yothin had an urgent matter to attend to, so he called his uncle, named Uncle Arthur, who was quite close to their family, especially with Yothin's father. Yothin asked Uncle Arthur to help take his father to the hospital. That day, Uncle Arthur drove Yothin's father and mother to the hospital together. Upon arrival, the doctors conducted a standard health check. When the results came back, it turned out that Yothin's father had cancer. The doctors at the hospital immediately admitted him to determine the stage of the cancer and what treatment options were available. At that time, Yothin had finished his urgent matter and rushed to the hospital, where he found his father already in a shared patient room. Uncle Arthur then excused himself to go home, leaving Yothin and his mother to watch over his father. The next day, the blood test results showed that Yothin's father had stage 4 liver cancer, the final stage. Besides cancer, the doctors also found diabetes, high blood pressure, and several other complications. Given his father's age, the doctors decided to admit him for a long-term stay to continue treatment and monitor his condition to see if surgery or chemotherapy would be possible. Every time the doctors came to evaluate his condition, his father would show symptoms of illness, often with a high fever due to infection, but he would return to normal after the doctors left. This happened every time, preventing the doctors from performing surgery or chemotherapy. They could only monitor his condition, waiting for the other complications to improve. After staying in the hospital for a while, his father began exhibiting strange behavior. On the 4th day of his hospital stay, his father suddenly asked Yothin if he could have raw food. Sometimes he would ask if there was any raw chicken or fresh meat. Yothin told his father, "No, Dad, you're seriously ill. You can't eat that kind of food." Instead, Yothin went to buy Hainanese chicken rice for his father because, before he fell ill, his father loved eating Hainanese chicken rice very much. When he brought the food, his father ate it ravenously, as if he hadn't eaten in a long time. After finishing, his father turned to him angrily, saying, "You bought so little, I'm not full. Next time, buy more." Yothin tried not to think too much about it. But after that day, his father started to exhibit increasingly strange behaviors. He began to use foul language, which he had never done with the family before, always referring to Yothin and himself as father and son. He also expressed a desire to smoke cigarettes and chew betel nuts. Yothin told his father that it was not possible given his serious condition. Thinking his father might be hungry, Yothin went down to buy another box of Hainanese chicken rice and also a box of braised pork rice, as his father had complained about the small portion last time. When he brought the food to his father, he ate voraciously, finishing both boxes with apparent delight. After eating, he turned to Yothin and said, "It's delicious, but it would be even better if it were fresh." At that moment, Yothin felt something was odd about his father's behavior. What was even more concerning was the next day, when Yothin went to visit his father. As he approached and sat next to the bed, his father turned to him with a stern face and said, "Why are you here? Who are you?" He then looked around the room and said, "The room is full of ghosts," pointing to empty spaces and saying, "It's there. It's here." Then he turned back to Yothin and asked again, "Who are you?" Yothin remembered that the doctor had given his father a strong painkiller, which relieved pain immediately. He wondered if his father's delirium could be a side effect of this medication. To clarify, Yothin went to the doctor treating his father and asked, "Doctor, does the painkiller you administered cause patients to have hallucinations or confusion?" The doctor replied that the medication did not typically cause such symptoms. After thinking for a moment, the doctor suggested that perhaps a relative had visited and told the patient something disturbing, which he then dreamed about, leading to confusion upon waking. Upon hearing this, Yothin thought about who had visited his father. Typically, it was just his mother and himself. He decided to ask his mother if anyone else had visited. His mother replied that Uncle Arthur and an elder referred to as Al had visited. Hearing this, Yothin speculated that maybe Uncle Arthur had told his father something unsettling. However, he dismissed the thought, thinking his father would eventually return to normal. Meanwhile, Yothin did not think much of it and went to the three-tiered drawer beside his father's bed, where patients' belongings were kept. Yothin opened the top drawer, hoping to find milk or something for his father to snack on. Instead, he found an old, small plate containing a candle, flowers tied with a sacred thread, and 19 baht in coins. Shocked, Yothin took the plate to his mother and asked, "Mom, what is this plate?" Initially, he thought it might belong to a previous patient who had forgotten it. But his mother replied, "It's from Al. Al made it." Yothin immediately asked, "Which Al, Mom?" His mother explained that Al, who had come with Uncle Arthur, was a shaman. Feeling increasingly uneasy, Yothin asked his mother what was in the plate and why it was placed beside his father's bed. His mother explained that Al had advised placing it there as an offering to the spirits to protect his father. Yothin felt something was amiss and argued, "Mom, if we're making offerings to the spirits, it should be at a shrine, not by Dad's bed like this." But his mother insisted that Al had recommended it and that she wanted to do it for peace of mind. Understanding his mother's anxiety about his father's condition, Yothin did not argue further, thinking that if it brought her comfort, it was all right. He placed the plate back where he found it. After that, Yothin helped his father settle down for the night before heading home. The next day, he went to visit his father at the bedside. This time, his father was asleep. He walked over to the table, hoping to find some fruit to prepare for him. While he was bending over to look for something, an uncle reached out and tugged on his shirt from behind. Yothin turned around to see a middle-aged man pulling on his shirt. Yothin quickly greeted him with a Y and said, "Hello, uncle." The uncle, with a hoarse voice, said, "Young man, come here. I have something to tell you." Yothin walked over to the uncle's bedside, but the uncle did not say anything right away. He looked over at Yothin's father's bed and said, "Close the curtain for me first." Feeling a bit uneasy, Yothin reached out and pulled the curtain between the uncle and his father. The uncle then began, "Young man, your father has been acting strangely. Last night, I woke up around 2 a.m. and saw your father sitting up in a meditative posture with his hands on his lap. He then leaned forward and backward repeatedly, muttering something under his breath. Seeing this, the uncle asked Yothin's father, "Aren't you going to sleep?" At that moment, his father stopped, slowly turned to the uncle and smiled. Then he pointed at himself and said, "Once I finish eating this, I'll eat you next." At first, the uncle couldn't hear clearly, so he asked, "What did you say?" Yothin's father repeated, "Once I finish eating this, I'll eat you next." The uncle, hearing this, quickly turned back to his bed and pulled the blanket over his head. Yothin was shocked by the uncle's story but remained skeptical. He told the uncle, "My father might be confused because of the medication the doctor gave him. Please don't take it to heart." The uncle responded, "Young man, do you believe in ghosts?" Yothin stayed silent, so the uncle continued, "Why don't you try giving your father a Buddha amulet? It might help." Yothin replied, "Okay, uncle, I'll bring a Buddha amulet for him tomorrow." After talking with the uncle, Yothin greeted him again and returned to his father's bed. As he pulled the curtain back, he was startled to see his father awake and staring at him. Yothin wondered if his father had heard the conversation, but his father soon turned to stare at the ceiling and closed his eyes without saying anything. A while later, his father still hadn't woken up, and visiting hours ended, so Yothin left. The next day, Yothin brought a Buddha amulet with him, one that his father had given him when he was a child. He wore the amulet around his neck and went to visit his father. As he approached the bed, he saw that his father was already staring at him from the doorway, looking angry. When Yothin reached the bed, he reached out to touch his father's arm, but his father immediately pulled away and said, "Don't touch me, I'm hot." Yothin stayed silent and decided to put the amulet around his father's neck. As soon as he did, his father became agitated and said, "Don't put that on me. Take it off. I'm hot. Don't put it on me." Yothin's mother, who was standing nearby, said, "You don't need to put it on him. He's sick and probably feels hot and sticky." So Yothin removed the amulet from his father's neck and placed it on the bedside drawer. Another day passed. Yothin visited his father again and asked the usual question, "Dad, do you want to eat anything?" His father gave the same response, "I want to eat something raw. I want to drink alcohol. I want to smoke." Yothin went down to buy Hainanese chicken rice and braised pork rice again. After his father finished eating, Yothin gave him his medicine and let him sleep. While sitting next to his father's bed, an elderly man from the left bed called out to him, "Young man." When Yothin turned, he saw an elderly patient, about 80 years old, beckoning him. The old man said, "Young man, come here." Yothin walked over, thinking the old man might need help. When he reached the bed, the old man said, "Close the curtain first, just like the previous uncle." After Yothin closed the curtain, the old man grabbed his arm and asked, "Young man, does your father have any mental health issues?" Out of curiosity, Yothin asked, "Why do you ask that?" The old man didn't respond directly and instead asked, "Where are you from?" When Yothin told him, the old man said, "Do you know that your father doesn't sleep at night?" Yothin, puzzled, asked, "What do you mean he doesn't sleep?" The old man explained that some nights, Yothin's father would stand on the bed, then lie down, only to get up again in a meditative posture, chanting in Khmer. The old man, being from Buram, understood Khmer and said the chants were not good ones. Yothin remained silent, unsure how to respond. The old man advised, "Talk to your father more. Try to bring him back to his senses." Yothin replied, "Yes, I will." Yothin himself was confused and bewildered by everything that had happened. There was the uncle from the adjacent bed who witnessed strange behaviors in his father, and then there was the old man who saw similar oddities. After visiting hours ended, Yothin left the patient's room to head home. Just then, a male nurse approached him and said, "Excuse me, I have something to ask you and something to tell you. Could you please come and talk to me for a moment?" Yothin followed the nurse to the balcony. The nurse said, "Your father has been exhibiting very strange behavior." Yothin asked, "How so?" The nurse replied, "Your father eats a lot, but his weight has dropped by nearly 10 kilograms. Previously, a nurse told me that your father said something strange to her during a health check. Your father turned to her and said, 'Do you have a husband? I want to eat you. You look delicious.' The nurse was shocked and has been too scared to check on your father since then. Only male nurses have been administering his injections." The nurse then asked Yothin, "Do you believe in ghosts?" Yothin remained silent, overwhelmed by confusion, unsure of what to make of everything he had encountered. The nurse quickly added, "It's okay. Your father will probably get better soon. I'll be rooting for him." Then the nurse walked away. Yothin headed home with a head full of questions. He began to think that something must have possessed his father. Despite his suspicions, Yothin continued to visit his father regularly. One day, while giving his father a sponge bath, his mother prepared a basin of warm water. His father sat quietly, saying nothing as Yothin bathed him. After the bath, Yothin applied powder to his father. At that moment, his mother stepped out to store the remaining supplies, leaving Yothin alone with his father on the bed. Yothin helped his father turn around, then sat behind him, letting his father's back rest against his own body. As he reached for a shirt to dress his father from behind, he leaned over, his head near his father's right shoulder. Just as he was about to put the shirt on, his father suddenly said, "Do you know, I've eaten your father." Yothin was shocked and horrified by his father's words. His father then slowly turned to look at Yothin, who recoiled in fear until he was pressed against the headboard. His father looked at Yothin and gradually smiled, a terrifying and sinister smile, as if he took pleasure in what he had said. Sweat began to pour from Yothin's body. Just then, his mother walked back in. Yothin quickly dressed his father and helped him lie down. The next day, on November 13th, the doctor treating Yothin's father called Yothin over for a conversation. The doctor explained that his father's condition had several complications. The cancer had spread extensively, and due to his age, surgery or chemotherapy was not viable. The doctor's tone suggested that Yothin should prepare for the worst and take his father home for his final days. The doctor prescribed painkillers, and Yothin completed the necessary paperwork to take his father home. Upon returning home, his father's condition worsened. He could barely walk, requiring his mother to support him to the kitchen and around the house, including to the bathroom and the backyard. One day, they heard chickens running around in the backyard, chickens that Yothin's father had raised. His father asked to be taken to see the chickens. Yothin's mother helped him over. Upon seeing the chickens, his father smiled and pointed, saying, "I want to eat that one. That one is big. I'll eat that one first." His mother was horrified and shouted for help, asking if anyone was nearby to help take his father inside. Yothin rushed over to assist and tried to guide his father back into the house. However, his father resisted, cursing at both his mother and Yothin, and tried to kick them away. Despite his father's resistance, Yothin managed to get him inside and gave him medication to help him sleep. On the second day at home, in the morning, a respected monk came to visit Yothin's father. This monk was very close to his father, who would often assist the monk in various errands. As the monk approached the house, Yothin's father, who had been weak, suddenly stood up and pointed at the monk, exclaiming, "Why are you here? What do you want with me? I'm not afraid of you." Everyone around was startled. The monk walked in and sat in front of the house. Yothin greeted him respectfully. The monk then told Yothin that his father had visited him in a dream the previous night, asking for help. Today, the monk had come to visit his father and requested to speak with him alone. Yothin agreed, and the monk asked everyone to leave the room, wanting to talk to Yothin's father privately. The monk then asked Yothin to pluck a beautiful, large tamarind leaf. Although confused, Yothin complied and handed the leaf to the monk. The monk placed the leaf in his mouth, chanting a prayer, then handed it back to Yothin, instructing him to place it on his father's chest and to ask everyone to leave the room. Yothin did as the monk instructed, placing the tamarind leaf on his father's chest. His father, who had been thrashing around, suddenly became still, though his head continued to move and his eyes darted around the room. Yothin then asked everyone to leave. The monk entered and everyone watched from the doorway, unable to hear what was being said. Yothin saw the monk approach his father's feet. At that moment, his father, lying still on the floor, licked his lips, a sight witnessed by all the relatives. The monk spoke to Yothin's father for almost 10 minutes before coming out and calling Yothin and his mother. He said to them, "You know, the person lying there is no longer your father." Yothin's mother burst into tears, and Yothin himself couldn't hold back his emotions, feeling both shocked and saddened. The monk asked, "Do you want your father to be at peace? Do you want him to pass on to a better place? I can help." Yothin consulted with the elders, who left the decision to his mother. Overcome with grief, she told Yothin to decide. Yothin then told the monk, "Okay, if that is not my father anymore, I want him to be at peace. I don't want him to suffer." The monk then went to Yothin's father and asked Yothin and his mother to hold his father's arms and legs. The monk stood at his father's feet and reached into his satchel, pulling out what looked like black roasted rice grains. He scattered the grains over his father's head. At that moment, Yothin's father began to cry, turning to his wife and saying, "I love you." Then he turned to Yothin and said, "I'm in so much pain. Take care of your mother." The monk then told Yothin's father, "Go in peace. Pass on to a better place. Leave all your worries behind." The monk reached into his satchel again, this time pulling out a small, white, curved object resembling a 2-inch piece of ivory. He pressed it to Yothin's father's forehead and chanted a prayer. Yothin's father then passed away right there. Seeing this, Everyone couldn't stop crying. The monk advised that they should hold the funeral for only 3 days before cremating the body. Yothin organized the funeral for his father, and everything went smoothly until the day they were to collect the ashes. On that day, the monk approached Yothin and said, "Do you want to know what happened to your father?" Yothin replied, "Yes, I do, monk." The monk then asked, "What will you do once you know?" Yothin answered, "I won't do anything, monk. I just want to know why my father ended up this way. Did he die naturally or not?" The monk reiterated, asking Yothin to promise not to take any further action once he knew. After Yothin promised, the monk revealed, "Your father was cursed to die." Yothin was shocked upon hearing this. The monk explained, "Everything happened because your father went to see him willingly. Before this, Yothin's father had been suffering from severe stomach pain. Uncle Arthur had suggested seeing a particular shaman for treatment. Yothin's father, along with his mother and Uncle Arthur, traveled to a neighboring province where the shaman performed a ritual. However, it wasn't a healing ritual but one intended to curse him to death. The monk concluded, "That's all I will say. You don't need to pursue this further." Back home, Yothin was still troubled by this revelation and decided to ask his mother about it. His mother confirmed that they had indeed visited the shaman because his father had been in severe pain, despite multiple hospital visits. Initially, after seeing the shaman recommended by Uncle Arthur, his condition seemed to improve but then worsened significantly. Eventually, Yothin pieced together that the person who had cursed his father was none other than Uncle Arthur. Uncle Arthur owed Yothin's father a considerable amount of money. To avoid repayment, he hired the shaman, who used an evil spirit to consume his father's body, leading to his death. A month later, Uncle Arthur's wife inexplicably returned all the money owed to Yothin's mother. Confused, Yothin asked her, "Why didn't Uncle Arthur return the money himself?" Uncle Arthur's wife remained silent. Yothin then tried to find out Uncle Arthur's whereabouts and discovered that he had become a monk. Determined, Yothin went to the temple. However, when Uncle Arthur saw Yothin, he avoided him and refused to talk. Yothin then visited the monk who had helped with his father. Upon arriving, the monk immediately said, "I told you not to pursue this matter further. Let it end here." Hearing this, Yothin decided not to dig deeper into the events and chose to move on, trying to forget the troubling past and continue with his life.